Good thinking. Welcome, good thinkers from all across the globe. Those of you wanting to take a little bit of time away from all the time we have to focus on what to think so we can relish and think about our thinking to hopefully improve how we think. But we deserve it. We deserve a little bit of time to think about our thinking. Away from judgment, away from being told what to think, just to think about our thinking. So welcome here. Let us know, share who you are, and please share where you're from. And I'm going to try to bring as many of your comments into the screen. Sometimes it flows a little too quickly for me, but I'm excited about today's topic of becoming a decision debiaser. And this information comes directly at us from our course called Removing Noise and Bias from Strategic Decision Making, our LinkedIn Learning course, which you can take. And if you have taken, let me know if you've taken it. Say in the chat, I've taken the course, or if you've read the book that inspired this course called Noise, A Flaw in Human Judgment. And we've talked about some aspects of noise. I'm going to remind people and I'm going to welcome people on the show. And then we're going to get into kind of what noise is and isn't. And then I'm going to ask you if you're interested in becoming a decision debiaser, hiring a decision debiaser, or training a decision debiaser. So let's bring on some good thinkers. We've got Barkley, first one in the house from DC, a regular good thinker in the house. Welcome, Barkley. Monique from the Bronx. Welcome. And we have got, it's going fast, Dave from Albania. Welcome. And we have got, hi, Naftal from India, from Kigali, India. We've got Mohammed from Egypt. We've got so many good thinkers in the house. We've got LinkedIn Learning saying, I've taken the course. Okay, so let me know what you think. Ray from Pennsylvania. I took the course but did not read the book. Okay, the course is a little shorter, I will say. And LinkedIn Learning user, I have the book. And Loya from Iran. So welcome. Arvind from India, welcome. And Stephen Ross, welcome to the show. And Stephen, we've got another Stephen with a PH Saltzman. Greetings from one of the 30 cities in the US named Portland. What? 30 cities? Okay, I learn something every week. And from Czechia, welcome, Jan Johnny. And from San Francisco, Stephen. All right. Keep them coming. Let us know who you are, where you're from. Let's get started. All right. When you think about noise, do you think about loud sounds? How about data? Do you think about data and kind of distinguishing the signal from the noise? In this context, we're talking about noise as it relates to decision making. I'm not saying that these other things don't impact and relate to noise, because loud sounds and a lot of information can cause variations in our mental processes, which we'll get into. But in this case, noise is defined in a very specific way, which is variability or different answers that come from human judgment, measuring with our brains, that come from human judgment, where we don't want different answers. We don't want different answers. And sometimes we want different answers. We want different opinions. We want different feedback. We want all kinds of different answers. When we get different answers and we want different answers, that's not noise. So noise is where we want one right answer, ideally, and we're getting a lot of different answers. For example, you go in to have something on your skin, like a mole, assessed, and you want to know, is it cancerous? Do you want different answers? Maybe you want difference of opinion about treatment, but do you want different answers? Ideally, no. And ideally, when you have an investment team and they're going to decide on how much to pay, maybe it's a real estate investment or an acquisition, and you have all kinds of algorithms and all kinds of methods that you use in your company to come up with the right answer. Maybe you're okay with it ranging from here to here, but you don't want here, and this person says don't invest, and this one says invest $100 million. That's too much variability. So where you have too much variability and you don't want it, a judge deciding on an asylum case, you want some kind of, you want to be able to count on this different judges reviewing the same case and coming to the same conclusion, or the same judge reviewing the same exact case, same person on different days, and not coming up with different conclusions because they were hungry or they were tired or they were angry about the case that came before. That is noise. Got it? So that's the noise we're going to talk about. And wherever you have human judgment, you have noise. And probably, as they say in the book, more noise than we like to think. All right, so I'm going to welcome some more people. Varun from India. Good morning, afternoon. Jacob from Nigeria. And we've got Suleiman from Ghana. So welcome from all across the globe. Okay, when you think back on cognitive biases, which are patterns that help us make sense of the world. They help us make sense of the world, but they can also lead us astray. They can be traps that lead us away from good decisions. When do you think cognitive biases first became a term that was used, maybe initially in psychological literature, whatever? Would you think it was A, 1995, B, 1891, C, 1972, or D, 2003? So put the date that your intuition tells you that cognitive biases have been around since 1891. Not that they've been around, but the idea of identifying them. Or maybe that was a new concept in 2003. Or maybe that was a new concept in 1972. Or maybe it was 1995. What is your intuition about when cognitive biases started being talked about in the literature? So put that in the chat. All right. I'll give you the right answer in just a minute. All right. Next. Okay. So this is good. What about implicit bias? And that refers to stereotypes or attitudes that affect what we say or what we do without us being aware of it. 1995, 1891, 1972, or 2003. Anyone want to take a guess? These are different related concepts. And by the way, they relate to noise, but I'm going to make a case why a decision debiaser isn't simply just removing cognitive biases or implicit bias, because the things that cause us to make different decisions is not all bias related. Bias is a big part of it. It's a big ingredient, but it's not the entire ingredient. It's not the entire recipe. So if you do bias training, it's awesome, but you're not attacking the whole problem. And this is why this decision debiaser is going to be so fun to talk about. All right, let's say hi to Thomas. Good evening from Germany. Okay, so I like Monique. Monique comes out and says, and she said this in response to cognitive biases. Cognitive biases as a concept, it kind of seems like a newer concept, but it's not. So I'm going to get into when cognitive biases and implicit biases first got presented in the literature, right around the same time, not the same time, but right around the time that they did. And I'll say hi to Olivia from the UK. All right. So when it comes to cognitive biases, and I'm talking about this for just a second before we dive into noise, because we need to get into, but I want to make a case. I want to prove a point. All right. So Arvin says 1972. And if 1972 is correct for cognitive biases, this is when Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky first came out with this concept of cognitive biases, flaws or errors or heuristics or patterns that help us make sense of the world, but they also can lead us astray. And Fiona, yay, Fiona from Ireland. Okay, so Varun says 1891. So old, but not that old. But these are not bad guesses, because sometimes when concepts are new to us, we think that they must be new to everyone. What? Our own anecdotal experience of learning about things is not necessarily a good barometer for when these things were learned about by other people. That's important to understand. All right, so way back in 1972, implicit bias is slightly newer, but it's not as new as you think. Psychologists Banerjee and Greenwald outlined their theory known as implicit bias in 1995. What about noise? Well, this book, Noise, where, it's really kind of when I got introduced to the statistical concept of noise in a much more comprehensive way was last year, 2021. That's when we started working on the course. But actually, there were some articles, early research articles, even in Harvard Business Review, I think back in 2016. But noise is this newer concept. And it's not a way to attack exclusively biases, but it's a way to understand that flaws in our decision-making come from all kinds of things that you may not be able to identify, so you can't go after them. But if you use a decision debiaser, and if you use hygienic decision-making, cleaner decision-making, you can eliminate the variability the different answers that you don't want, or the range of different answers that you might not want, without knowing exactly what's causing them. Because we refer at Applied Curiosity Lab, our company, we refer to this, the cause of this noise as VOMPs, V-O-M-P, VOMPs, plural, variations in our mental processes, VOMPs. And these VOMPs come from all kinds of things. We know that judges make judicial decisions, oftentimes the same case. They may not recognize it as the same case. And I'm not talking about the same crime. I'm talking about the same case, the same person. They may make a different judgment before lunch than after lunch. Why? Well, maybe they're hungry. Maybe it's hot outside. So we know that pollution levels affect our test-taking abilities. We know that higher levels of pollution correlate with lower test scores. I mean, there's a lot of things that affect our decision-making that are not told by stories. Now, cognitive biases and implicit biases are a strong component too. Okay? They're a strong component, but they don't tell the whole story, even though they tell a compelling story. And it's harder to believe that it's easy for me to believe that you, but not me, make decisions differently based on things that I'm not even aware of, that I can't even correct for, because it seems so frustrating. Like, don't I just eat first? Don't I just make sure I'm hydrated? Yes, yes, and yes. But there still could be all kinds of things that lead my decisions astray. All right. So there's all kinds of ways to clean up your decision-making. Let me ask you this. What's an example that you can think of where you rely on people to give you the answer? Maybe you rely on a group of people, maybe you rely on someone, but you want a clear answer. You don't want them to be all across the board. You don't want to ask them on a Wednesday and have them tell you one thing, and ask them on a Tuesday and have them tell. What's an example of something you yourself, and put it in the chat, can think of where you don't want variability, or you don't want too much variability? You're okay with a little bit, but you want, you kind of want, whether you're asking one person multiple times or many people. What's an example? Anyone at work, personal life, anything? Share it in the chat. All right. Maybe you want your team to agree on a new software program you should invest in, or you're on a board of directors and you want the board of directors to, maybe not everyone agrees exactly on, the exact CEO, but you want a certain amount of agreement. You don't want, I hate this person, I love this person, I hate that. You want some amount of agreement. So Ray, excellent. Let's start. My teenager, where are you and when will you be home? Yes. Now that's more of an answer than a decision. I should probably be clear. A decision, you're trying to make a decision, because this is really a decision making. A grade from a class. Okay, Monique, I'm going to give rubber chickens to Ray and Monique. And Fiona, risk assessments. Because you want to know that if you write a paper and your professor looks at that paper, that your grade isn't going to be determined by whether the professor is hungry, or they just got in a fight with their husband, or they just yelled at them. You don't want your grade to be subject to VOMPs. You don't want a lot of noise. That's a great example. I mean, and grades are noisy. Decision making in groups is kind of what we're talking about with this decision debiaser. But when you realize what the cool things that you can do when you become or train or hire a decision debiaser, I think you're going to find it useful in all kinds of ways. So this is great. Fantastic. We've got all kinds of answers about when you want one answer or a narrow set of answers. Now, if you have agreement, does that necessarily tell you that you've got the right answer? So you've got this whole team, you want everyone to agree. Maybe it's an investment decision, or maybe you've got a bunch of your TAs and your professor, and they're all looking at your grades, or several teachers are looking at your grade, and they're grading a paper. If they all agree, do you have the right answer? Yes or no? This is a trick question. Well, this is a tricky thing, and we get into it, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but we do get into it in this course, in our LinkedIn Learning course. But if you have everyone agree, you might have the right answer, but you might also be all agreeing. You might have statistical bias. You might all share a bias, right? So you don't always know if agreement means the right answer. So that's where people go, well, then screw it. This thing is too difficult. Stay with me. It isn't. It's fun. You're going to love it. All right. So Thomas says no, and Thomas is right. If you have agreement, you don't necessarily have the right answer. And the thing about the right answer is sometimes it takes a lot of time for the outcomes to play out. And then you've got the second order effects and third order effects. So if you worry about, the actual accuracy, part of it is it depends on when you measure it. So it gets a little complicated. So throw all that out and just try to understand, how do you clean up your decision process? How do you make cleaner, more hygienic decisions? One of the ways is to use a decision debiaser. Now, that's what we're going to jump into. All right, so here's my question for you. Would you say that your organization, maybe you're an independent contractor, maybe you work for yourself, maybe you work for a company, maybe you're involved in an organization, charitable organization, whatever, the organization that comes to mind that you mostly deal with, would you say that your organization has a culture of curiosity where everyone is encouraged to speak up, regardless of job title, regardless of level, or regardless of the topic? How many of you would say, totally, in my organization, it is totally okay for anyone to ask any question at any time? Anyone. Or it's okay to ask your question about some things, but you can get in trouble if you ask about other things. So some things are okay, other things are taboo. Or it's not okay to be curious about things that could contradict what we're supposed to believe. Like, so we believe that only the managers can tell us about this, so we don't even question, we don't expect our underlings, or we don't expect our, the people that are above us in the hierarchy to be open to our questions. We're not allowed to do that. Or some people are allowed to be more curious than I feel comfortable with. How do you feel? So do you feel totally comfortable asking anything in your organization out of curiosity? Do you have that culture of curiosity? Or is there, are there some things you're just not allowed to be curious about? You have that curiosity, but you're not allowed to ask. And some people are allowed to be more curious than I feel comfortable with. All right. So Suleimana says, tax you will pay. Okay, excellent. So that might mean that if you ask, there may be an implicit or explicit tax you're going to pay. Don't ask those questions. All right. How about you? What do you think? What do you think? Share it in the chat. Be honest. Do you feel comfortable asking questions out of curiosity at work? Or are there certain topics about which you do not ask? Or some people are allowed to be curious about some things and other people are allowed to be curious about other things. All right. So Monique says some things are okay and some things are not okay. All right. Okay. So you have a limited culture of curiosity. It's okay to ask some questions. All right. Some questions. Just curious about this, because one of my favorite ways and one of the best ways to remove noise and biases from strategic decisions is to use an independent decision observer. And that takes away some of the guardrails that you are talking about. Arvind says it's okay to ask about some things. It takes away some of the guardrails when some of those things that you need to ask about are pertinent to the decision. So some of the things might not be relevant to the decision. Some of the things might not give you a reliable answer because the source of that answer doesn't really have all the evidence that you might need. But sometimes when there are things you need to ask that are relevant and reliable evidence and relevant to the decision, having those guardrails around what you can and can't ask can put you in a precarious situation and can lead to noise. All right. So I'm going to bring some more comments in and we're going to get right into Decision Debiaser. So Ray says, openness to questions varies by division. Mine is very open. Fantastic. That's great. Good morning, Esmeralda. And also, okay, so let's see. Being curious and asking questions regarding to irrelevant subjects may be acceptable or appreciable, but interfering or under questioning the irrelevant domains may meddle in making the right decisions and maybe even derail decision making. Absolutely. That's a really good point. And that's why I really think that having this designation, this role where you're supposed to do certain things, and you're not doing it because of your personality or your level in the organization, but you're doing it for a specific hygienic decision-making purpose, gives permission to ferret out when it's useful and when it's not. So is it job related? Something I need clarifying. Okay, good. So, and that's really hard too, because maybe you need that clarification because you don't get something, but someone else doesn't think that you need to be asking that or doesn't think that you need that information. So then it becomes this weird thing where you think I need this to make my decision, but you don't think I do. Let's get into it. What is more interesting to you? So as I'm talking about this, I want to know, okay? And then we're going to get into becoming a decision debiaser, what you need to do. What's more interesting to you? One, becoming a decision debiaser. So if it's interesting to you to become a decision debiaser, put it in the chat and you might change your mind at the end. We'll see. Two, hiring a decision debiaser. Sometimes one of the things that we're creating for next year is, as we're doing more and more high-stakes decision-making training and consulting at Applied Curiosity Lab, we're bringing decision debiasing to teams. So hiring, or maybe you want to train a decision debiaser. Maybe you're senior in your company or you're wherever you are in your company, or you want to train a decision debiaser. So what's more interesting, becoming one, hiring one, or training one? Put it in the chat. I kind of want to know what you're thinking about, because regardless of your answer, here's what you need to know about what makes a decision debiaser successful. And there are really 3 requirements. And then I'll give you a little scoop on maybe where you could get some cheat sheets. Okay, so Arvin says 1, becoming a decision debiaser. I think it's fun. I think it's really fun. But when you hear these 3 things, you also understand that it's doable. It's achievable. But people have to understand what it is. Okay, so Monique says training. I think training is fun too. Actually, I think training. Hiring is, training one is fun. Training one is fun too. Hiring, you just hire someone to come in. Then it becomes part of like, do I want to do that? Do I want to train someone? So that kind of hiring can facilitate becoming and training. But I think becoming and training are kind of the fun ones for y'all. All right. So number 1, decision debiasers are empowered. And by that, I mean, they should want the role, but they don't really appoint themselves unless you hire them. So if you are looking at becoming a decision debiaser, you should want the role, but you should ideally, even if you talk to senior leaders, or you are, if you talk to senior leaders, and by the way, you don't need to be senior. It doesn't matter where you are in the organization. What you need is to be empowered by senior leaders so that the decision debiaser has authority, because you have to have authority, and not authority you ask for, but authority you're granted publicly. So it can come from any level of the organization, or they can be an outside consultant or coach, like what we do, but they must be excited, and then they must be empowered to guide the strategic decision process so that every member of the decision-making team is committed to accepting their guidance. So that's really, really important. So Michael says becoming one, Varun says becoming one. Perfect. This is great. So if you want to become a decision debiaser, you have to be strategic about how you gather the kind of authority that someone else can give you, because you can't grab it for yourself. People be like, oh, Becky's just trying to meddle in our decisions. No, I'd like to present Becky as our decision debiaser who has had training, who, by the way, is independent. And this gets to number 2. Number 2 is decision debiasers are independent. They don't judge or weigh in on the decision. So if you are part of the decision team and you are judging something, maybe a hiring decision, investment decision, any kind of decision that involves human judgment, measuring with our brains, and you are part of that decision team, you are ideally ineligible to be a decision debiaser, because decision debiasers guide the process independently. Okay, so that's the other thing. So if you love being in there, strategizing, making the decisions, this may not be the role. Or maybe you can do it about some decisions, but you're a decision debiaser in decisions that you don't have a stake in the outcome. That's the other thing. So they have to be independent. You have to be independent. Your job instead as a decision debiaser is to guide the process, checking for biases, keeping judgments independent, which is a whole other topic, which is why I'm going to tell you at the end about a little opportunity if you're interested, but keeping judgments of all the decision makers independent, aggregating the results, and reporting to the decision team. So they're independent to reduce noise, because if I'm weighing in on the decision as a decision debiaser and I have I have a stake in the outcome, can I be partial? Not so much. I mean, I might think, I didn't take that into consideration at all. Whether I wanted to admit it or not, probably those kinds of things crept in, because I'm a human. That kind of stuff comes into the brain. All right. And then the third one is they are trained. Decision debiasers are trained. They're not just someone who took a cognitive bias or implicit bias course and is going to play whack-a-mole with, calling out biases. Oh, there was that. Oh, there's confirmation bias. Oh, there's affect heuristic. Oh, there's Occam's razor. That's not what this is. That's not what this is. It's not what do you call bingo? It's not, identifying all the biases. That's a part of it for sure, but they're trained with teams that already have a formal decision-making process that's designed to reduce noise. And the questions asked and the way judgments are made will be different in independent judgments. Like, you wouldn't get in a group of decision makers to talk about a candidate or to talk about an investment and hash it all out. First, people would analyze the information independently, come to their own independent judgments. Maybe you would aggregate the judgments depending on what it is, and the decision debiaser would collect all of that. Or maybe the decision debiaser would, once everyone has an independent judgment, the decision debiaser would gather the people together. And at that point, they check for biases, and they also check for a lot of other things. And they do it in real time. So they don't look at the decision and then analyze it after the fact and say, oh, that was biased, or this bias was there, or this implicit bias was present. They do it in real time. So that's the other thing. Should you check for your own biases as a decision debiaser? Why wouldn't you have someone on the decision team just do this? Well, who can remind everyone one of the key reasons? Who can tell us one of the grandmamas of all the biases? Blind spot bias. What's the blind spot bias? Who wants to take a stab in the chat? Blind spot bias. That's the bias that prevents us from seeing our own biases. So we are much more capable of seeing biases in other people. And since noise is not just about biases, it's about all kinds of variations in our mental processes. That's why you want a decision debiaser who can facilitate independent judgments before we come together to brainstorm as a group. Okay, so how do you become a decision debiaser? First of all, you have to understand. Number one, you have to be empowered by people senior enough to make sure that the people making the decision respect your role. Number two, you have to be independent. You cannot be part of the decision process. Now we know why. And because Fiona says, We don't see our own biases. And Monique says biases you cannot see within yourself. And Jada says learning from you is always exciting. Thanks. I wasn't expecting that. I was pulling in, but I appreciate that. Okay. So all of this, yes. So if you are interested in becoming a decision debiaser, I will give you a little hint that in the course, in our an exercise file in removing noise and bias from strategic decision making in the LinkedIn Learning course. And if you don't have LinkedIn Learning, I might be able to put, if you got enough people ask, I might be able to put a link. It's only good for 24 hours in the comments. I don't know, because I have LinkedIn guidelines to give you access to it for free for 24 hours, because in that course is a downloadable PDF that takes you through, very rudimentary, but very useful, takes you through some of the things, because the last bonus point for those of you who stay till the tail end is a decision debiaser uses a debiasing checklist. So any of you who think, I would like to have training, I'd like to become a decision debiaser, I'd like to have this training, I'd like to have my boss know about this. I am the boss. I'd like to do the training. We are gathering a small group of beta testers for sometime in the fourth quarter. We don't have the date set for doing some of this training. And so if you're interested in being a beta tester, to becoming a decision debiaser, or even you could use the same content to learn to train one, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or at Applied Curiosity Lab. Hope you enjoyed today's topic, and we will, am I here next week? Yes, we'll be back next week. Keep your eye out for the topic, and feel free to share ideas about what future topics should be as well. Hope you have a great week. Thanks.